You ever have one of those moments where someone shows you exactly who they are and you can't unsee it? That happened to me on a Thursday evening in March, and it didn't just hurt my feelings, it rewired my entire life. I'm an HVAC technician, 12 years in the trade. I started when I was 23, and I've built a steady, honest life with my hands, fixing what's broken, making sure families don't freeze in winter or sweat through their sheets in summer. I make around $24 an hour. It's not luxury money, but it's real money. Rent paid on time, 2 cars paid off. A quiet 2-bedroom rental outside Atlanta that I genuinely thought was a we're building something kind of home. I thought we were okay. My husband, Vincent, was packing for his yearly guys' trip to Miami. Same crew every year, same routine, 4 days of cocktails, shopping, and apparently talking about their spouses like we're some kind of reality show they're all watching together. I was at our kitchen table doing what I always did, going through the monthly bills, credit card statement, utilities, rent, the boring adult stuff that keeps a life from collapsing. The credit card bill was higher than usual, mostly his purchases, nothing insane, just more than normal. I tried to keep my voice neutral, the way you do when you're trying not to start a fight over something that's already fragile. Hey, I said, tapping the paper with my finger, there's a charge here from Nordstrom for $360. What was that for? He didn't even look up at first, just kept folding clothes with that tight, irritated energy already simmering in his shoulders. Those shoes I bought for Ashley's wedding, he said, like it was obvious. $360 for shoes, I repeated. My throat went dry. That's more than our electric bill. That's when he stopped. He turned to face me fully, hands on his hips, eyes sharp, like he'd been waiting for an excuse to unload something he'd been carrying around for a long time. And then he said it. You know what? My friends think you're a joke. They think I married way beneath me, and honestly, they're right. The air in that kitchen went thick. My heart didn't race. It sank, heavy, slow, like something inside me had finally let go. I stared at him, hearing the word joke echo in my ears, and I understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't about shoes. This was about respect. And once respect is gone, love doesn't have anything solid left to stand on. Before that night, before those words burned themselves into my memory, I would have told you my life was stable, not perfect, not glamorous, but solid. I'm 35 now. I grew up in a working-class family where showing up mattered more than showing off. My dad worked maintenance at a public school. My mom cleaned offices at night. Money was always something we talked about plainly. What we had, what we didn't, what could wait. There was no shame in honest work, only in not pulling your weight. That mindset followed me into adulthood, into my career. HVAC wasn't some childhood dream. It was a practical choice, a trade I could learn, master, and rely on. And I did. I earned my certifications. I took overtime when it was offered. I built a reputation for being reliable, thorough, the kind of technician clients asked for by name. That's how I met Vincent. He was a sales associate at a mid-range furniture store back then. I was there to service their busted climate system, 3rd time that month. He joked about how I was the only one who ever actually fixed it. I remember thinking he was charming in an easy way, confident, talkative, someone who seemed to want more out of life than where he was standing. We started dating not long after. In the beginning, he loved my independence, loved telling people I worked in a real trade. He bragged about me to his friends, said it was refreshing to be with a woman who didn't rely on him financially. When we moved in together, the split felt fair. We shared bills, shared chores, shared plans. Or at least I thought we did. Over the years, things shifted subtly. So subtly, I barely noticed. His circle of friends changed first. They were louder, flashier, always talking about promotions, bonuses, new cars. Conversations became competitions. Who earned more? Who traveled more? Who was winning at adulthood? I didn't fit naturally into those conversations, and slowly, Vincent stopped pulling me into them. At parties, he'd introduce me by my name, not my job, or he'd gloss over it quickly, redirect the topic. When someone asked what I did, he'd sometimes answer for me. She fixes air conditioners, he'd say, laughing, like it was a cute quirk instead of a profession. I noticed. I told myself it didn't matter. We got married 6 years in. Small ceremony, nothing extravagant. He wanted something bigger, flashier, but I convinced him we didn't need to start our marriage in debt. At the time, he agreed. said he admired my practicality. Looking back, I realized that agreement came with quiet resentment. His spending habits crept upward as his social circle shifted. Designer shoes, weekend trips, dinners that cost more than a full grocery run. I didn't forbid anything. I just asked questions, tried to plan, tried to keep us aligned. Each time he'd sigh like I was dampening the mood. Relax, he'd say. We're fine. And maybe we were, financially. Emotionally, though, something was eroding. His friends' opinions started mattering more than mine. Their approval became something he chased. And somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as his partner and started seeing me as the thing that didn't quite fit the life he imagined for himself. I didn't see it clearly then. I just felt it. That low-grade tension. The way conversations felt weighted. The way I started editing myself around him. Softening questions, swallowing concerns, choosing peace over honesty. Until the night he didn't soften anything at all. Until he finally said out loud what he'd been thinking for years. And once he did, there was no unhearing it. After that night in March, it felt like my mind kept replaying moments I'd once brushed aside. Little scenes that suddenly lined up into something I couldn't ignore anymore. There were the comments Vincent made casually, almost jokingly, when his friends were around. "You should have seen the place Monica and her husband just bought," he'd say, glancing at me like he was checking my reaction. "Must be nice, right?" Or the way he'd sigh when I talked about work. Not because he didn't understand it, but because he didn't want to. "You're always tired," he'd complain. "You smell like refrigerant half the time." I used to laugh it off, tell him it came with the territory, tell myself real relationships weren't built on perfection. But those small dismissals added up. When his friends came over, I cooked, cleaned, smiled, and listened to conversations that revolved around bonuses, promotions, and luxury brands I had no interest in. No one ever asked me about my day. No one wanted to hear about a system I'd diagnosed or a client I'd helped. And Vincent never redirected the conversation back to me. He let me fade quietly into the background of my own marriage. The pressure didn't just come from his friends. It seeped in from his family, too. His mother, subtle but persistent, liked to ask questions that weren't really questions. "So," she'd say over dinner, "have you ever thought about going back to school? Maybe doing something different?" Different meant better. Better meant something she could brag about. Vincent never shut those conversations down. He'd just sit there, nodding slightly, like he was considering their point. That hurt more than if he'd outright agreed. I started noticing how often he compared us to other couples, not out loud at first, but in his tone, in the way he'd say things like, "Ashley and her husband don't argue about money," or "Monica's husband just bought her a new car without blinking." As if love was measured in purchases, as if I was failing some invisible test. I began second-guessing myself, wondering if I really was holding him back, if my insistence on budgets and discussions made me boring, small. I even caught myself apologizing for things that weren't wrong, asking permission before buying groceries, explaining over time like I was justifying my existence. The house felt heavier, conversations shorter. His phone buzzed constantly, and he'd smile at messages he didn't share with me. When I asked, he'd say, "Just the guys," like that explained everything. I wasn't suspicious of infidelity, not yet. What I felt was worse. I felt irrelevant. Then came the Miami trip. The same trip every year. Same friends, same promises that it was just a break. But this time, something about it made my stomach twist. He packed like he was escaping. Careful outfits, expensive shoes, cologne I'd bought him that he rarely used around me. The night before he left, I lay awake listening to him move around the bedroom, humming softly, almost relieved. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a vacation for him. It was validation. 4 days surrounded by people who told him he deserved more, that he could do better, that he'd settled. And somewhere in those conversations, my name had become shorthand for everything he felt embarrassed about. By the time I sat at that kitchen table with the credit card statement in my hands, the tension was already there, coiled and waiting. All I did was give it an opening. And when it finally snapped, when the truth spilled out of him without hesitation, I realized something terrifying and freeing all at once. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the seed of something that had been growing quietly for years. And now that it had surfaced, there was no going back to pretending everything was fine. The words didn't land all at once. They arrived slowly, like something poisonous spreading through my bloodstream. "My friends think you're a joke." At first, my body didn't react. No shaking, no tears, just a strange pressure behind my eyes, like my brain was stalling, trying to process a sentence it didn't recognize as real. I remember the kitchen in exact detail. The low hum of the refrigerator, the late afternoon light slanting across the counter, the way the credit card statement was still open in my hands, corners bent from where I'd gripped it too tightly. I looked at Vincent, searching his face for hesitation, for regret, for some sign that he'd misspoken. There was none. Instead, he crossed his arms, jaw set, like someone finally relieved to say something he'd been rehearsing in his head for a long time. "They don't get it," I said slowly. My voice sounded unfamiliar to my own ears. "They don't live our life." He laughed, not loudly, just a short, dismissive breath through his nose. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "They do live their lives. They're ambitious. They're moving forward." "And I'm not?" I asked. He shrugged. "You're comfortable," he said. "You could do more if you wanted to, but you're happy being this." He gestured at me. Not at the house, not at the bills, at me. Like I was an object he'd grown tired of. Something cracked in my chest, not explosively, but quietly, like a structural beam giving way under too much weight. "So," I said, forcing myself to breathe evenly, "you talk about me like this to your friends?" He didn't answer immediately. That pause told me everything. "They worry about me," he said finally. "They think I deserve more. More money. More status. More than me." The silence that followed felt thick, oppressive. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and heavy, pounding in my ears. I thought about the dinners I'd cooked for those friends, the weekends I'd rearranged my schedule so Vincent could attend events that mattered to them, the polite smiles, the swallowed discomfort. And all along, behind my back, I was the punchline. "Do you think they're right?" I asked. He hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. "Yes," he said, "I do." That was it. Not the shoes, not the money, not the trip. That single word severed something permanent. I felt myself go very still. Inside, my thoughts were racing, but my body went calm, eerily calm, like it knew this was a moment that required clarity, not chaos. I closed the credit card statement carefully and stacked it with the other bills. My hands didn't shake. I noticed that, and it scared me more than if they had. "I see," I said. He exhaled, almost relieved. "Good," he said. "I'm glad you're finally hearing this. Maybe now you'll understand why I need this trip. I need to be around people who actually inspire me." He turned back to his suitcase, humming softly as he folded another shirt. That humming felt louder than any yelling could have. I stood there for a long moment, watching him pack clothes I knew he couldn't afford on his own. Clothes bought with shared money. With money I earned crawling through attics, kneeling in basements, fixing systems no one noticed until they stopped working. I walked into our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't look at me. Didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't apologize. That was when the realization settled fully into place. This wasn't about anger, or stress, or a bad day. This was contempt. And contempt is something you don't come back from. I thought about the future I'd been quietly planning, the kids we'd talked about someday. The idea of bringing a child into a home where their mother was a joke in their father's eyes made my stomach twist. I stood up. "I appreciate your honesty," I said. He nodded, still folding clothes. "I figured you would." That hurt more than anything else. I walked past him, down the hallway, and into the bathroom. I locked the door, not because I was afraid he'd follow, but because I needed a moment where his presence couldn't touch me. I stared at myself in the mirror. Same face, same tired eyes, same woman who'd been holding everything together for years. The difference was, now I knew exactly where I stood. When I unlocked the door and walked back into the bedroom, Vincent was still packing, still humming, already mentally gone. That was the moment my marriage ended. Not with a scream, not with tears, but with the cold clarity of understanding that respect, once lost, doesn't magically reappear. And I wasn't going to spend another day trying to earn something that should have been given freely. Shock doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like silence. That night, after Vincent went back to packing like nothing had happened, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't follow him around the apartment demanding explanations. I moved through the rest of the evening on autopilot, washing a mug that didn't need washing, straightening pillows that were already straight, staring at my phone without reading a single word on the screen. Inside, though, my mind was unraveling. I kept replaying the conversation, dissecting every sentence like it was evidence in a case I hadn't known I was building. Not to twist his words, but to confirm I'd heard them correctly. "My friends think you're a joke. I married beneath me. They're right." There was no ambiguity there, no room for misunderstanding. He hadn't stumbled over his phrasing or misspoken in anger. He'd been calm, confident, certain. That certainty hurt more than the words themselves. I lay awake beside him that night, listening to his breathing even out as he fell asleep. The man who just dismantled my sense of safety had no trouble resting. His back was turned toward me, a physical barrier I suddenly noticed had been there for a long time. I stared at the ceiling and did something I hadn't allowed myself to do before. I asked hard questions. When had I started shrinking? When did I stop expecting to be defended? Why had I accepted being talked over, talked around, talked about? Part of me wanted to blame myself, to frame this as a failure of communication, to tell myself I should have spoken up sooner, pushed back harder, demanded more respect earlier. But another quieter part of me knew the truth. I had spoken up, just not loudly enough to inconvenience him. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. Vincent was already up, checking his phone, energized in a way he rarely was around me. "You sure you're okay with me going?" he asked casually, adjusting his watch in the mirror. The audacity of the question almost made me laugh. "Yes," I said evenly. "You deserve time with your friends." And I meant it, just not in the way he thought. As he moved through the house, ticking off items on his mental checklist, I watched him differently. Not as my husband, but as a man who had already emotionally exited our marriage. That clarity changed everything. While he finished packing, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same spot where the conversation had detonated, and let myself feel the grief I'd been postponing. Not loud, messy grief, a deep, aching sadness for the version of my life I'd believed in. I thought about the woman I'd been when we met, confident, capable, proud of what she could build with her own hands. Somewhere along the way, I'd traded that pride for peace, or what I thought was peace. What I actually had was silence. When Vincent kissed my cheek before bed that night, the gesture felt foreign, performative, like muscle memory rather than affection. "I'll call you when I land," he said. I nodded. He had no idea that while he was planning cocktails and rooftop photos, I was planning something else entirely. Not revenge, not drama. An exit. I didn't confront him again. I didn't demand reassurance. I didn't ask him to take his words back, because I wasn't interested in apologies born out of discomfort. I wanted truth, and I already had it. That night, lying in the dark, I asked myself one final question. If nothing ever changed, if this was the best it was going to get, could I live like this? The answer came quickly, calmly, without panic. No. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't plotting. I wasn't even heartbroken in the way movies portray. I was resolved. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight for a relationship. It's to accept that it's already over and quietly start choosing yourself. By the time Vincent's alarm went off for his early flight, I was wide awake. And while he thought I was just being supportive, I was already letting go. You don't always feel the moment your life changes. But I did. And once I felt it, there was no unfeeling it. Friday morning arrived faster than I expected. Vincent was up before dawn, moving through the house with quiet efficiency, already half gone. I made coffee like I always did. Scrambled eggs, toast. The normal rhythm of a shared life, except now it felt like a performance I was watching from outside my body. "You sure you don't mind driving me to the airport?" he asked, checking his phone. "Of course," I said. "I called in sick." He smiled at that. Actually smiled. Like I was being sweet, supportive. Like I was still playing the role he expected. If he had looked closer, he might have noticed something different in my eyes. But Vincent had stopped really looking at me a long time ago. The drive to the airport was quiet. He talked about restaurants they planned to visit, clubs his friends insisted were must-sees, how good it would feel to get away from stress. I nodded at the right moments. At the terminal, he kissed me quickly and grabbed his suitcase. "Have fun," I said. "I hope you all have a lot to talk about." He laughed. "Oh, we will." He had no idea how true that was. I watched him disappear into the crowd, rolling designer luggage bought with shared money, heading toward 4 days of validation from people who thought I was beneath him. I sat in the truck for a moment after he was gone, hands resting on the steering wheel, heart steady. Then I pulled out my phone. The first call I made was to my supervisor, Martinez. I told him I was dealing with a separation. I didn't overshare, just enough truth to explain why I needed a fresh start. He didn't hesitate. "There's an opening at the Henderson district," he said. "Same pay, same benefits, closer to where you said you might be staying." "Yes," I said immediately. I want it." "Monday," he replied. "You're in." The second call was to my brother Colin. "Can I stay with you for a while?" I asked. There was a pause, just long enough to register what the question meant. "What happened?" he asked. "He told me his friends think I'm a joke," I said, "and that he agrees with them." Colin didn't raise his voice. That scared me more than if he had. "When do you need help moving?" he asked. Tomorrow morning. I'll be there, he said. I'll bring Brett and Mason. The third call was harder, our landlord. I explained that I would be moving out, but Vincent would be staying until the lease ended. She asked if I was sure, said we'd always seemed happy. Things change, I told her. I'll be out by Saturday night. While I was making these calls, Vincent was already texting his friends, probably sharing jokes about my overreaction to a credit card bill. By the time he landed in Miami, my plan was already in motion. I spent Friday sorting our life with ruthless clarity. What was mine? What was his? What we'd bought together. I didn't take anything I couldn't justify. No pettiness, no revenge, just fairness. I opened a new individual account and transferred exactly half of our joint savings, down to the dollar. I boxed my clothes, my tools, my books, my computer setup. I left his things untouched. The absence would speak louder than destruction ever could. Saturday morning, Colin's truck pulled up right on time. Brett and Mason didn't ask questions. They saw my face, the boxes, the tension in the air, and understood enough. Are you sure about this? Mason asked once, gently. He said I was beneath him, I replied. That's not something you work through. Then let's move, Brett said. 3 hours later, half my life was gone from that house. The living room looked strange without the TV I'd bought. The kitchen counter had an empty space where my coffee maker used to sit. The house wasn't destroyed, just incomplete. Like a truth had been removed, and the illusion couldn't hold itself up anymore. I left one thing behind. A simple note on the kitchen table, right where Vincent always dropped his keys. Nothing dramatic, just honest. Hope they think this punchline is funny too. That evening, Vincent had called from Miami, buzzing with excitement. This place is amazing, he said. I really needed this. I'm glad, I said. Enjoy every minute. I love you, he added casually. I didn't say it back. He didn't notice. Sunday passed quietly. I unpacked at Colin's place, set up my computer, organized my tools. It felt strange, lighter than I expected. Like I'd been carrying weight I didn't realize was optional. Sunday night, Vincent called again. I'll be home around 6 tomorrow, he said. Maybe we could go out to dinner. I've got so much to tell you. We'll definitely have things to talk about, I replied. Monday evening came. I was helping Colin fix a thermostat when the landline at our old house started ringing. I didn't answer. My phone buzzed seconds later, then again and again. By 8 o'clock, I had over a dozen missed calls and voicemails stacked like dominoes. I listened to them slowly. Confusion, shock, panic, apologies, anger, fear. Please come home, he begged in one. You can't just leave like this, he snapped in another. By the 6th voicemail, his voice was breaking. I'm scared, he said. That was when his friends stopped being funny. Because suddenly, this wasn't a story he could control. This was consequence. And for the first time since Thursday night, the power dynamic shifted. Not because I yelled, not because I punished him, but because I left. And leaving, I learned, is sometimes the loudest thing you can do. The silence after the calls stopped was heavier than the noise before them. By 11 that night, Vincent's name stopped lighting up my phone. No more missed calls, no more frantic texts, just a blank screen and the quiet hum of Colin's house settling into sleep. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something vast and unfamiliar. I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it cut slow circles through the darkness. For the first time since Thursday night, my resolve wavered. Not because I doubted my decision, but because grief finally caught up to me. This was it. No more shared routines, no more inside jokes, no more we. 12 years of marriage doesn't disappear cleanly just because you make the right choice. It leaves bruises. It leaves echoes. I thought about the version of Vincent I'd fallen in love with. The man who once admired my independence, who'd said he loved how grounded I was. I wondered when that admiration turned into embarrassment, when pride turned into comparison. And the darkest question of all crept in quietly, without accusation. Had I stayed too long? I replayed moments where I'd swallowed my discomfort, where I'd smiled through dismissive comments, where I'd chosen harmony over honesty. Not because I was weak, but because I loved him. That realization hurt in a different way. Because loving someone doesn't protect you from being diminished by them. Around 2 a.m, I got up and walked into the bathroom. I barely recognized the woman in the mirror, not because she looked broken, but because she looked tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I whispered to my reflection, barely audible. What if you're wrong? What if this really was just one bad fight? What if he meant it differently? What if walking away was too extreme? The doubts stacked quickly when I let them in. But then another voice, calmer, steadier, answered back. He didn't apologize until there were consequences. He didn't correct his friends when they disrespected you. He didn't hesitate when he agreed you were beneath him. This wasn't impulsive. This was overdue. Still, the weight of being alone pressed in on me. Sunday night, Vincent had said the house felt wrong without my things. What he meant was that his life felt unstable without the parts of it he'd taken for granted. But that didn't make it easier to sit with the knowledge that I'd shattered something permanent. The next morning at work, my first day at the new location, I moved through tasks with practiced precision. Diagnose, repair, move on. The physical nature of the job grounded me, kept my hands busy when my thoughts threatened to spiral. No one there knew my story, and that anonymity felt like oxygen. During lunch, I checked my phone. 3 more voicemails, all from late the night before. Apologies, rationalizations, promises. I didn't mean it. I was stressed. We can fix this. Each message landed softer than the last, not because they hurt less, but because they confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't sorry he thought those things. He was sorry he'd said them out loud. That distinction mattered. By Wednesday, his desperation shifted outward. Mutual friends started reaching out, carefully at first, like they were afraid to choose the wrong side. "She's really upset," one said. "He's worried about you," another corrected himself mid-sentence. I kept my responses neutral. Polite, short. "I'm fine. I needed space. I'm handling it." Inside, though, the loneliness peaked. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from choosing yourself when it costs you someone you loved. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It creeps in when the house is silent, when there's no one to witness the strength it takes to not go back. Thursday night, exactly 1 week after the kitchen conversation, I sat alone in Colin's spare room, surrounded by boxes I hadn't fully unpacked. This was the lowest point, not because I missed Vincent, but because I was grieving the belief that love, if given enough patience, could fix everything. I finally allowed myself to cry, not for him, but for me. For the woman who'd tried so hard to be enough for someone who measured worth in comparisons. For the years I'd spent minimizing myself to make someone else comfortable. And in that grief, something unexpected happened. Clarity. I didn't want him back. I wanted my dignity intact. And those two things could not coexist. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it gave it direction. I wasn't falling apart. I was shedding something that no longer fit. And even in the darkness, I could feel it. The faintest shift, like the ground beneath me, wasn't crumbling anymore. It was solidifying. The next step was coming, and I was ready for it. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks or confrontation. It arrived quietly, on a Friday morning, when I finally answered Vincent's call. I hadn't planned to. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment before I accepted it. Not because I missed him, but because I was done running from conversations that no longer scared me. "Where have you been?" he blurted the second I said hello. "I've been going out of my mind." "I've been working," I said calmly. "I started at a new location this week." A pause. "You changed jobs?" His voice sharpened. "You didn't even discuss that with me." And there it was. Even now, desperate, shaken, afraid of losing me, he still believed he had authority over my choices. "I didn't need permission," I said. "It's closer to where I'm staying." "Where you're staying?" His breath caught. "This is your home. Our home." "No," I replied evenly. "It's a rental you live in. I don't live there anymore." Silence stretched between us, thin and brittle. "You're being ridiculous," he said finally. "Come home. We need to talk like adults." That word again. Adults. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. "Adults take responsibility for what they say," I told him. "Adults don't humiliate their partner and then act shocked when there are consequences." "It was one comment," he snapped. "One stupid comment said under stress." "It wasn't just a comment," I said. "It was the truth. You said your friends think I'm a joke, and you agree with them." "I didn't mean it," he said, quieter now. "Yes," I replied. "You did. You just didn't think I'd leave." His breathing changed. I could hear the panic creeping in. "Please," he said, "just come back. We can fix this." I opened my eyes. This was the moment. Not the moment I proved anything to him, but the moment I finally articulated something to myself. "I don't want to fix this," I said. "I want to move on." "You don't mean that." "I do." I ended the call before he could argue me back into old patterns. Over the weekend, the fallout accelerated without me lifting a finger. He started posting vague messages online about marriage being hard, about feeling abandoned. His friends flooded the comments at first with sympathy and encouragement, but then the tone changed. Practical questions crept in. Are you okay financially? Is she still helping with the bills? How long has she been gone? Questions that revealed the truth he'd been avoiding. Monday morning, he called my workplace, claiming a family emergency. My supervisor shut it down calmly, professionally, with boundaries I hadn't realized I was allowed to enforce in my own marriage. Tuesday, he called me again, this time panicked. The landlord says I need to give notice, he said. She thinks I can't afford the rent alone. Can you? I asked. A long pause. That's not the point. It is, I said. That's exactly the point. By Wednesday, his friends stopped answering his messages. One unfriended him entirely. Another left his texts on read. The same people who'd encouraged him to look down on me weren't lining up to support him now that the lifestyle they admired was slipping away. That's when it clicked fully. This wasn't about love. It was about convenience. And I had been carrying far more of it than I ever realized. Saturday morning, 2 weeks after I moved out, his sister's number flashed on my phone. She asked if we could talk, said Vincent was unraveling, said he needed closure. I agreed to one conversation. Not to reconcile, but to end it cleanly. When I hung up, my chest felt strangely light. For the first time since Thursday night, I wasn't bracing for impact. I wasn't afraid of what he'd say. I knew exactly who I was and what I was no longer willing to accept. The power hadn't shifted because he suffered. It shifted because I stopped doubting myself. I had skills, stability, family, a future that didn't require shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. And once I truly understood that, the fear dissolved. I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was walking away intact. And that made all the difference. He arrived at my brother's place exactly 1 hour later. Not in his car, his sister's. That detail struck me first. A small but telling crack in the image he used to curate so carefully. The confident man with opinions and comparisons had been reduced to borrowing rides and asking favors. I watched him through the window as he sat in the driver's seat for a moment longer than necessary, hands gripping the steering wheel, shoulders slumped. When he finally stepped out, he looked smaller. Not physically, emotionally. Like the weight of reality had finally landed. Colin opened the door and let him in without ceremony. Vincent stopped when he saw me sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd been helping install cabinets. I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. I didn't rush to fill the silence. You look good, he said awkwardly, like it was a peace offering. Sit, I replied. You said you needed to talk. He sat across from me, hands shaking slightly as he set his phone on the table. 2 weeks of panic had carved lines into his face. His eyes were tired, red. The confidence he used to wear so easily was gone. I came to apologize, he said. For real this time. Okay, I said. Go on. He swallowed. What I said that night was wrong. You're not a joke. Your job isn't something to be ashamed of. You work hard. You've always worked hard. All true, and far too late. I was stressed, he continued. About money, about my life. I took it out on you. I said things I didn't mean. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. Not defensively, but comfortably. Here's where we disagree, I said calmly. I think you meant every word. You just never planned for me to hear them. That's not true, he said quickly. Your friends think I'm a joke, I replied. You said that, and then you said they're right. Those were your exact words. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Anger doesn't invent thoughts. It reveals them. His eyes filled with tears, real ones. Not the dramatic kind, the exhausted kind. I've lost everything, he said quietly. My friends won't answer my calls. I'm getting forced out of the house. I can't afford the rent. My own family thinks I screwed this up. I nodded slowly. You did. He flinched. I know I hurt you, he said. But we can fix this. Counseling, communication. We can start over. No, I said. Not harshly, not angrily, just clearly. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. What do you mean no? I mean no, I repeated. There's nothing to fix. But you love me. I loved who I thought you were, I said. That person doesn't exist. People always want to believe mistakes are temporary, that apologies can rewind time, that consequences are negotiable. But respect isn't a switch you flip back on. This wasn't a mistake, I continued. This was a revelation. You showed me how you talk about me when I'm not in the room, how you see me, how little respect you have for the life we built. Colin stood quietly by the counter, pretending to clean tools, but I knew he was listening. So that's it? Vincent asked. 12 years over one fight? 12 years ended because my husband thinks I'm beneath him, I replied. Yes, that's it. He dropped his head into his hands. I was wrong, he whispered. No, I said, you were honest. I reached into my bag and placed a folded document on the table. Divorce papers. His head snapped up. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, I said. You can sign now, or you can hire a lawyer and delay the inevitable. Either way, we're done. He stared at the papers like they might disappear if he didn't look too closely. You're throwing away everything, he said hoarsely. I'm preserving myself, I corrected. This is about your feelings being hurt. No, I said evenly. My feelings aren't hurt. My eyes are open. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, I think he understood. Not that I was angry, but that I was finished. Where will you go? He asked quietly. I already have, I said. I have a job. I have family. I'll be fine. And me? That's up to you, I replied. You're an adult. He had no response for that. He sat there for several minutes after I stood up. Eventually, Colin walked him to the door. When it closed behind him, the house felt still. Not empty. Still. 6 weeks later, he signed the papers. I heard through my lawyer that he'd moved back in with his parents and taken a job he used to sneer at. The friends who once laughed with him had vanished when support required effort instead of opinions. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply moved forward, because the truth didn't need revenge. It did enough damage on its own. 6 weeks after that conversation, the papers were signed. Not dramatically, not with tears or last-minute pleas. Just signatures on paper, quiet, final, undeniable. I found out through my lawyer that Vincent had moved back in with his parents, that he'd taken a job at a call center, that his sister had helped him pack up what was left of his life in that rental house. The same house where he once stood in the kitchen and told me I was a joke. I didn't feel satisfaction when I heard any of it. What I felt was distance, like that chapter belonged to someone else now. I bought a small place of my own not long after. Nothing impressive. No open concept bragging rights. Just a space that was mine, paid for with my work, my savings, my effort. The first night I slept there, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I kept working. Same trade, same hands, same pride. Only now, no one flinched when I talked about what I did for a living. No one compared me to imaginary standards set by people who measured worth in numbers instead of character. And slowly, without forcing it, I started to feel like myself again. The woman who didn't apologize for taking up space, the woman who didn't shrink to protect someone else's ego, the woman who understood that respect isn't a bonus, it's a baseline. Sometimes I wonder if Vincent tells people how our marriage ended, if he frames it as one bad fight, one misunderstanding, one comment taken too seriously. Maybe he does, but I know the truth. Words don't end marriages. Beliefs do. What ended us wasn't what he said, it was what those words revealed. About how he saw me, about how long he'd been seeing me that way, about how easily he let other people turn me into a punchline. The lesson I took from all of this is simple, and it's one I wish I'd learned sooner. Never stay where you are tolerated instead of respected. Never beg someone to see your value. And never confuse comfort with love. If someone shows you who they are, believe them. Walking away didn't make me bitter. It made me free. And the funny thing? The best response to someone who thinks you're a joke isn't proving them wrong out loud. It's building a life so solid, so peaceful, and so honest that you don't need them to understand it at all.